The security footage timestamp read 3:47 a.m. when I first noticed the woman in the parking lot. She stood perfectly still beneath the flickering streetlight, staring up at our office building's 14th floor. My floor. The one that was supposed to be empty except for me. I'd been working the night audit shift at Meridian Financial for 3 months, and the isolation had become comfortable. No chattering coworkers, no meetings, no pretending to care about weekend plans. Just me, spreadsheets, and the gentle hum of servers in the adjacent room. The pay differential made the vampire schedule worth it, and my manager, Sandra, barely checked in anymore. Perfect for someone who preferred shadows to scrutiny. But this woman changed everything. She appeared every night at exactly 3:47 a.m., same spot, same posture. Through the security monitor at my desk, I watched her stand motionless for exactly 13 minutes before walking away. Never looked at her phone, never moved except to leave. The parking lot cameras captured her arrival from the north entrance, but somehow missed her departure. The footage just showed empty asphalt after 4 a.m., as if she dissolved into the fluorescent-lit darkness. I should have reported it. Should have called building security or mentioned it to Sandra. Instead, I found myself waiting for her, anticipating 3:47 a.m. like a twisted appointment I couldn't miss. By the second week, I'd memorized her routine. Medium-height dark coat, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a small purse clutched against her chest like a shield. Her stillness was unnatural, no shifting weight, no checking the time, no human fidgeting. Just 13 minutes of statue-like surveillance. The breakthrough came when I decided to test a theory. If she was watching my floor, she'd notice if something changed. So I turned off every light except my desk lamp, creating a beacon in the darkness. Then I waited. 3:47 a.m. arrived with mechanical precision. She appeared under the streetlight, but this time her head tilted upward differently. She'd noticed. For the first time in 2 weeks, she moved during her vigil, taking 3 steps closer to the building. The motion was jerky, unnatural, like someone operating her body through thick glass. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone to record her, but when I looked back at the monitor, she was gone. The timestamp read 3:51 a.m. She'd left 4 minutes early. That's when I found the first note. It was slipped under my keyboard when I returned from the bathroom, written in precise block letters on yellow sticky paper. You're not supposed to be there. The security cameras showed nothing. No one entering or leaving the floor. No indication anyone had been near my desk. I rewound the footage 3 times, checking every angle, every timestamp. The note simply materialized while I was gone for 90 seconds. I threw it away and tried to focus on work, but concentration had abandoned me. Every shadow seemed deliberate, every sound carried intention. The building's familiar nighttime symphony, humming lights, settling concrete, distant traffic, now felt like whispered threats. The second note appeared the next night. She knows you're watching. This time I didn't leave my desk. I sat perfectly still for 4 hours, eyes fixed on the monitors, documenting every second. Yet somehow, between one blink and the next, yellow paper materialized on my keyboard like a magic trick performed by invisible hands. I called Sandra that morning, voice carefully casual as I asked about building security protocols. Had there been any incidents? Any concerns about unauthorized access? She laughed, reminding me that our floor required keycard access, and the overnight cleaning crew finished their rounds by 2 a.m. No one else should be up there. Why? She asked. Everything okay? I almost told her. The words assembled themselves in my throat, ready to spill out in a desperate confession. But something held me back, maybe pride, maybe fear of sounding insane. Instead, I mumbled about hearing strange noises and hung up. The third note was different. Check the supply closet. My legs moved before my brain could object, carrying me down the darkened hallway to the storage room we rarely used. The door was unlocked, which seemed wrong but not impossible. Inside, boxes of printer paper and office supplies created shadowy mountains in the dim light. That's where I found them. Dozens of photographs pinned to the back wall, hidden behind a shelf of toner cartridges. Pictures of me at my desk, taken through the window from impossible angles. Me eating lunch at 2 a.m. Me stretching at my workstation. Me sleeping briefly with my head on the keyboard during a particularly exhausting shift. But the most disturbing were the close-ups of my apartment windows, taken from the building across the street. My bedroom. My kitchen. My living room where I sat watching Netflix in underwear, thinking I was safe behind drawn curtains. At the center of this shrine sat a single photograph I didn't recognize, a woman in a dark coat standing in my apartment hallway, key in hand, smile too wide for her narrow face. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk asterisk. The photograph was impossible. I lived alone on the 6th floor of a secure building. I'd never given anyone a key, never invited anyone over, never even had maintenance inside without being present. Yet here was proof that someone had not only entered my home but documented the violation with casual confidence. I tore the photos down with shaking hands, shoving them into my backpack before fleeing to my desk. But focus was impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself staring at that one photograph, the woman's face partially obscured by shadows, her smile containing knowledge I couldn't access. At 3:47 a.m., she didn't appear. For the first time in 3 weeks, the parking lot remained empty. I watched the monitors obsessively, switching between cameras, adjusting brightness and contrast. Nothing. The absence felt more threatening than her presence had. I left work that morning with a new deadbolt and security chain from the hardware store. Spent the day installing them, checking and rechecking the locks, closing every curtain and blind in my apartment. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of settling wood, every footstep in the hallway above, sent electricity through my nervous system. When I returned to work that evening, my desk had been rearranged. Subtle changes: monitor tilted slightly left, chair height adjusted, coffee mug moved 3 inches to the right. Someone had been there, touching my things, claiming my space with invisible fingerprints. But the security footage showed nothing. 8 hours of empty office space, undisturbed and peaceful. I pulled up the building's master access log on my computer, scrolling through months of keycard data. Every employee's entry and exit was recorded, time-stamped, and archived. But buried in the data, I found something that stopped my breath. My own keycard had been used to access the building every night for the past 6 months. Every night, including weekends when I wasn't scheduled. Including my vacation days. Including nights when I was provably somewhere else, with receipts and witnesses to confirm my whereabouts. According to the system, I'd been coming to work obsessively, compulsively, even when I knew I hadn't. Someone was using a duplicate of my keycard, living a shadow version of my routine. I called the security company immediately, demanding to know how this was possible. The technician explained that keycards could be cloned with the right equipment, but it required physical access to the original for several minutes. When had someone gotten close enough to my card to copy it? The answer came with sickening clarity as I remembered my first week on the job, when I'd left my wallet in the bathroom during a late-night coffee break. I'd found it exactly where I'd left it, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. But it had been gone for maybe 10 minutes, long enough for someone to clone my access card and return it without me noticing. Someone had been planning this for months. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk asterisk. The revelation hit me like cold water. I'd been wrong about everything. The woman in the parking lot wasn't watching me, she was creating an alibi. While I sat at my desk, transfixed by her theatrical performance, someone else was in the building. Someone who knew my schedule, my habits, my weaknesses. I pulled up the security footage again, but this time I ignored the parking lot camera. Instead, I focused on the internal building cameras, the ones monitoring hallways and elevator banks. What I found made my stomach drop. There, on the 12th floor, a figure moved through the darkness every night at 3:50 a.m. Always 3 minutes after the parking lot woman disappeared, always staying just outside the camera's full range. But I caught glimpses, a shoulder here, A foot there, someone who knew exactly where the blind spots were. They were using the empty offices 2 floors below me, setting up equipment, running cables, doing something that required hours of uninterrupted work. The woman in the parking lot was nothing but a distraction, a puppet show designed to keep my attention fixed on the wrong threat. I should have called the police. Should have run. Should have done anything except what I actually did, which was take the elevator down to the 12th floor. The doors opened onto darkness, but not the familiar darkness of an empty office building. This darkness hummed with electronics, glowed with the soft light of multiple monitors, whispered with the sound of cooling fans and hard drives. Someone had built a command center in the abandoned accounting department. Dozens of screens lined the walls, each one displaying different views of the city. Traffic cameras, security cameras from other buildings, feeds from residential complexes. But the largest monitor, the one positioned like an altar at the center of it all, showed a familiar scene. My own apartment, filmed from multiple angles with crystal clarity. They weren't just watching me at work. They were watching me everywhere. Equipment covered every available surface: computers, servers, transmission gear, recording devices. This wasn't the setup of a casual stalker. This was professional surveillance, the kind that required serious money and technical expertise. But what froze my blood wasn't the equipment, or the invasion of privacy. It was the wall of photographs behind the main workstation. Hundreds of them. Not just of me, but of dozens of other people. Men and women of various ages, photographed in their homes, at work, during intimate moments they thought were private. Each photograph was labeled with names, addresses, schedules, behavioral patterns. Each person was being watched, catalogued, studied like laboratory specimens. I was just one data point in something much larger. That's when I heard the elevator ding. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, approaching with unhurried confidence. I had seconds to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The accounting department was an open floor plan, all cubicles and glass partitions. The only exit was the same hallway those footsteps were traversing. So I crouched behind a server rack and tried to control my breathing as someone entered the room. "I know you're here," a woman's voice called out, pleasant and conversational. "The elevator logs show you came down, but never went back up." It was Sandra, my manager, who barely checked on me, who'd laughed off my security concerns, who had complete access to my schedule and keycard information. "You were never supposed to find this place," she continued, moving between the workstations with practiced familiarity. "The parking lot show was supposed to keep you distracted indefinitely. Most people never look beyond the obvious threat." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows as her footsteps approached my hiding spot. "But you had to be different, didn't you? Had to dig deeper, ask questions, spoil months of careful planning." She was right beside me now, so close I could smell her perfume. The same perfume I noticed during our brief morning meetings, back when I thought she was just a slightly distant manager instead of something far more dangerous. "The beautiful thing about night shift workers," Sandra said, her voice taking on a dreamy quality, "is how isolated they become. How paranoid. When they disappear, people assume they just couldn't handle the loneliness anymore. Mental health crisis. Very sad. Very believable." She knew I was there. This was just theater, another performance designed to maximize my terror before the finale. "But don't worry," she whispered, so close I could feel her breath on my neck. "You won't really disappear. You'll just become part of the collection. A very special part, since you found your way down here all by yourself." I closed my eyes and waited for whatever came next. When I opened them, Sandra was gone. The room was empty, silent except for the hum of electronics. No footsteps, no breathing, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But on the main monitor, my apartment had been replaced by a new feed, the office building's parking lot, where a familiar figure in a dark coat had resumed her vigil beneath the flickering streetlight. Watching. Waiting. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. The smell hit me first, that antiseptic hospital odor mixed with something darker, more organic. I'd been working the graveyard shift at Riverside Medical Center for exactly 11 days when I discovered what they were really doing in the basement. I never wanted to work nights. The pay differential was decent, but I was a morning person by nature. Unfortunately, morning people don't get hired when they have gaps in their employment history and references that won't return calls. So when the hospital offered me a position in their special documentation department, I took it without asking too many questions. My supervisor, Dr. Helena Marsh, was a thin woman with prematurely gray hair who spoke in whispers and avoided eye contact. She explained my duties during a brief orientation that felt more like a warning than training. I would be processing patient files, updating records, and ensuring documentation compliance for cases that required additional sensitivity. The work must remain confidential, she emphasized, her pale fingers drumming nervously on the desk. These files contain information that could be damaging if mishandled. Professional discretion is not just expected, it's legally required. I signed more non-disclosure agreements than seemed necessary for a basic clerical position, but the pay was good and the work seemed straightforward. 8 hours alone in a basement office, filing papers and updating computer records. No patient interaction, no medical emergencies, no drama. The first week passed without incident. I processed files for patients with routine procedures, appendectomies, broken bones, minor surgeries. Nothing unusual, nothing that seemed to require the level of secrecy Dr. Marsh had implied. I began to think she was just overly cautious, the type of administrator who treated every paper cut like a potential lawsuit. But during my second week, the files changed. They arrived in sealed envelopes marked with red stamps I didn't recognize. The patient names were replaced with numerical codes. The procedures were described in technical language that seemed deliberately obscure. And most disturbing of all, many of the files were marked as post-mortem documentation, despite being dated from the current month. I tried to rationalize it. Large hospitals processed a lot of paperwork related to deaths, natural causes, accidents, complications during surgery. It was part of the business. But something about these files felt wrong. The language was too clinical, too detached, like someone was trying very hard to sanitize something unspeakable. On my 10th night, I found a file that shouldn't have existed. Patient number 4471 was listed as a 34-year-old male who had undergone routine tissue harvest 3 days earlier. The procedure was marked as successful, with notes about optimal specimen quality and excellent preservation parameters. But what made my blood run cold was the attachment stapled to the back, a newspaper clipping about a missing person. Marcus Chin, age 34, had disappeared from a downtown parking garage 11 days ago. His car was found unlocked with his wallet and phone inside, but no trace of Marcus himself. Police suspected foul play but had no leads. The photograph in the newspaper matched the physical description in patient number 4471's file perfectly. I sat in that basement office until 4 a.m., staring at the file and trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Marcus had been found injured and brought to the hospital under emergency circumstances. Maybe the tissue harvest was some kind of medical procedure to treat his injuries. Maybe the timing was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The next night I came prepared. I smuggled my phone past the metal detectors, found the blind spots in the security cameras, and began photographing files. What I discovered made me understand why Dr. Marsh had been so insistent about confidentiality. Riverside Medical Center wasn't just treating patients. They were harvesting them. File after file documented procedures on people who were supposed to be missing, dead, or had never officially existed in the first place. Homeless individuals with no family to ask questions. Undocumented immigrants who couldn't report disappearances to authorities. Psychiatric patients from state facilities who were already considered unreliable witnesses. The procedures were described in medical terminology, but the reality was clear. These people were being systematically dismantled for their organs, tissue, and biological materials. Hearts, kidneys, corneas, bone marrow. Everything valuable was catalogued and distributed to buyers whose identities were hidden behind corporate shell companies. But the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I was photographing a particularly damning file when I heard footsteps in the hallway above. The basement was supposed to be empty during night hours, with only security guards making occasional rounds. But these footsteps were purposeful, deliberate, heading directly toward the stairwell that led to my office. I quickly shut off my phone's camera and slipped the files back into their proper order, trying to look busy with legitimate work. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices, Dr. Marsh and someone else, a man with a deep voice and a slight accent I couldn't place. "The new documentation specialist is working out well," Dr. Marsh was saying as they descended the stairs. "Very thorough, very discreet. No questions about the special cases." "Good," the man replied. "We can't afford another situation like we had with the previous employee. Some people simply can't handle the realities of advanced medical research." They stopped just outside my office door. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes, Dr. Marsh's familiar thin frame and a larger figure in what looked like surgical scrubs. "Should we bring him into the program fully?" Dr. Marsh asked. "He's already processing the documentation. It would be more efficient if he understood the complete scope of our work." The man was quiet for a long moment. "Not yet. Let's see how he handles the next phase of files first. If he can maintain discretion through the enhanced documentation, then we'll consider expanding his role." "Enhanced documentation?" Dr. Marsh sounded uncertain. "The live procedure files," the man said matter-of-factly. "We're moving beyond post-mortem processing. Dr. Carver believes we can increase yield significantly by harvesting from living subjects under controlled conditions. The documentation requirements will be more complex." My hands trembled as I pretended to type, fighting to keep my breathing steady. They were talking about performing these procedures on living people. Not just harvesting organs from the dead or recently deceased, but actively taking apart human beings while they were still alive. "I'm not sure our current documentation specialist is ready for that level of involvement," Dr. Marsh said carefully. "Then we'll find out, won't we?" the man replied. "If he can't handle it, we'll deal with that problem the same way we dealt with his predecessor." They walked away, their voices fading as they headed deeper into the basement toward areas I'd never seen. But their words echoed in my mind, particularly that casual reference to my predecessor. What had happened to the person who worked this job before me? And what exactly did they mean by deal with that problem? I sat alone in that basement office for the remaining 4 hours of my shift, my mind racing with possibilities. By the time 7 a.m. arrived, I had made a decision. I was going to expose everything, the files, the procedures, the people behind it all. I would take my photographs to the police, to the media, to anyone who would listen. But first, I needed more evidence. Concrete proof that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk asterisk. The opportunity came 2 nights later when Dr. Marsh left early, claiming she had a family emergency. For the first time since starting the job, I was completely alone in the basement with access to her office and the locked filing cabinets I'd been curious about since my first day. Her office keys were in her desk drawer, along with access cards for restricted areas of the hospital. I felt like a thief as I rifled through her things, but the weight of what I'd discovered made normal ethical considerations seem insignificant. The locked filing cabinets contained the records I'd been afraid to find. Video documentation of the procedures, financial records showing payments from organ brokers, and most damning of all, a list of upcoming acquisitions, with names, addresses, and detailed plans for how each person would be taken. 23 people were scheduled to disappear over the next 2 months. Men and women of various ages, all selected because they were unlikely to be missed or their disappearances wouldn't be thoroughly investigated. The planning was meticulous, professional, terrifying in its casual efficiency. But what made my stomach drop was finding my own name at the bottom of the list. Documentation Specialist, current employee. Termination scheduled following completion of enhanced file processing. Method: staged accident, vehicle collision. Body to be processed through standard channels. They'd been planning to eliminate me from the beginning. The job, the gradual introduction to sensitive files, the careful observation of my reactions, it was all designed to determine how much I could be trusted before they disposed of me. I photographed everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. Then I copied the files to a thumb drive and prepared to leave. But as I reached for the office door, I heard something that stopped me cold. Voices in the hallway. Multiple people moving through the basement, heading in my direction. The night documentation shift should be ending soon. Dr. Marsh's voice carried clearly in the concrete corridors. We need to begin the transition tonight. Are you certain he's ready? That was the man with the accent from before. Ready or not, we can't wait any longer. He's seen too much, and Dr. Carver needs the basement cleared for the new arrivals tomorrow night. I was trapped. The only exit from Dr. Marsh's office led directly into the hallway where they were approaching. But there was another option, the access card for restricted areas. Maybe I could find another way out through the parts of the basement I'd never seen. I slipped out of the office and headed deeper into the building, using the access card to open doors that had been locked since my first day. What I found in those restricted areas would haunt me forever. Operating rooms designed for procedures that had nothing to do with healing. Refrigerated storage units filled with carefully labeled biological materials. And in the farthest corner of the basement, behind a door marked Specimen Preparation, I discovered where my predecessor had ended up. The nameplates on the storage containers were organized alphabetically. Under M4, Miscellaneous Documentation Staff. I found a container labeled with a name I recognized from my employment paperwork. The person who had held my job before me. They hadn't just eliminated him. They had processed him like any other acquisition, reducing a human being to a collection of useful parts stored in sterile containers. I ran then, abandoning stealth for speed, racing through the basement corridors toward any exit I could find. Behind me, voices called out in alarm as they discovered Dr. Marsh's office had been breached. Footsteps echoed off concrete walls, getting closer with each passing second. But I had one advantage they didn't expect. I knew about the service elevator that connected the basement to the parking garage. It was mentioned in the building schematics I'd processed during my first week, though I'd never used it myself. The elevator was ancient and slow, but it carried me up from that nightmare basement toward what I hoped was freedom. As the doors opened onto the parking garage, I could hear alarms beginning to sound in the building behind me. I drove home in a daze, the thumb drive burning like a coal in my pocket. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, impossible to dismiss. I would take it to the FBI, to investigative journalists, to anyone with the power to shut down Riverside Medical Center's horrific operation. But when I arrived at my apartment building, there was a man waiting in the lobby. He wore surgical scrubs and had kind eyes that didn't match the cold smile on his face. "You must be our documentation specialist," he said pleasantly. "I'm Dr. Carver. I believe you have something that belongs to us." The building's security guard was slumped over his desk, breathing but unconscious. Dr. Carver held up a small syringe, the needle gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Don't worry," he said, stepping closer. "You won't feel a thing. And afterward you'll be making a much more significant contribution to medical science than you ever did with your filing." That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this from a hospital bed, though I'm not sure which hospital, or even if I'm really in a hospital at all. The room has no windows, no identification, nothing to indicate where I am. My phone is gone, my clothes are gone, and there are IVs in both arms that I'm afraid to disconnect. Dr. Carver visits every day, always friendly, always professional. He tells me they're preparing me for a procedure that will help advance their research significantly. He seems genuinely excited about it, like a scientist discussing a breakthrough discovery. I know what's going to happen to me. I've seen the files, processed the documentation, learned how their system works. In a few days, maybe sooner, I'll become just another numbered container in their basement storage facility. But I managed to hide one thing before they took me: a backup copy of all the evidence, uploaded to a server with instructions to release everything if I don't check in within 30 days. If you're reading this, those 30 days have passed. The address is 1247 Riverside Medical Center, basement level. The names on the acquisition list are real people who will disappear if someone doesn't stop this. Don't let them get away with it. Don't let me become just another missing person whose family will never know what really happened. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who offers you a job working the graveyard shift at a hospital. Some shifts never end. The film burned through the projector at 2:17 a.m., filling Theater 6 with the acrid smell of melting celluloid and something organic that made my stomach turn. I'd been working the night shift at the Paramount Cinema for 3 months, but I'd never seen flames move so deliberately, purposefully, like they were reaching for something. What disturbed me most wasn't the fire itself. It was the fact that Theater 6 was supposed to be empty. The Paramount was one of those old downtown theaters clinging to life with midnight cult classics that drew maybe 20 people on a good night. Management kept me on nights because someone needed to maintain the ancient projection equipment, and insurance required 24-hour security coverage. Most nights, I had the place to myself after 11 p.m. I'd make rounds, check equipment, clean projectors, and read during long stretches of silence. Peaceful work that let you think without interruption. But 3 weeks ago, things got strange. Theater 6 showed signs of recent use despite no scheduled screenings. Seats would be warm, as if people had just left. Fresh popcorn containers and drink cups appeared in aisles. The air smelled like crowds, cologne, perfume, and nervous energy that accumulates when people gather in darkness. I mentioned it to Mr. Kowalski, the night manager, but he dismissed my concerns with weary patience. Old buildings settle. Heat lingers in those seats for hours. You're probably smelling cleaning chemicals. But I knew this wasn't my imagination. The second week brought more obvious signs. I found programs scattered throughout Theater 6, elaborate, professionally printed programs for films I'd never heard of. The Confession of Marcus Delacroix, The Final Testament of Sarah Chin, David Morrison's Last Performance. The typography was elegant, old-fashioned, like Golden Age cinema programs. Each contained detailed cast information, plot summaries, production notes. The films were described as documentaries, intimate portraits of real people during significant life moments. But online searches revealed nothing. No reviews, no distribution information, no evidence these films existed. The programs were dated with current dates, always for 2 a.m. screenings in Theater 6. I started staying closer to that theater during rounds, listening for sounds that would confirm my suspicions. What I heard was worse than the evidence I'd been finding. Voices. Soft, conversational, as if people were having intimate discussions in darkness. Sometimes I caught individual words. Please, sorry. Understand, spoken with desperate emotion that made my skin crawl. But whenever I opened the theater doors, I found empty seats and the lingering smell of fear. Mr. Kowalski's explanations became increasingly dismissive. Sound carries strangely in old buildings. You're probably hearing traffic, maybe conversations from the apartment building next door. But I knew what I was hearing wasn't ambient noise. The third week, I discovered the entrance. During my usual 1 a.m. rounds, I noticed the service door behind Theater SIX's screen was propped open. This door led to a maintenance corridor connecting all theaters, allowing staff to move equipment without disturbing audiences. It was always locked at night, accessible only with Mr. Kowalski's master key. I approached cautiously, listening for any indication of who might have opened it. The corridor beyond was dark, but I could see footprints in the dust, multiple sets, leading from the back entrance toward Theater 6. Fresh footprints, made within hours. Someone was using the maintenance corridor to bring people into the theater without passing through the main lobby where I'd see them. I followed the footprints, my flashlight revealing disturbing evidence with each step. fabric scraps caught on concrete walls, dark stains on the floor that looked like dried blood. And carved into the wall near Theater SIX's entrance, dozens of names with dates, all within the past 6 months. Marcus Delacroix, March 15th. Sarah Chin, April 2nd. David Morrison, April 28th. The same names from the mysterious film programs. I was starting to understand what was happening in Theater 6, but the full horror hadn't revealed itself yet. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. ***. I called in sick the next night and returned through the back entrance, using emergency codes I'd memorized during training. If Mr. Kowalski was running an illegal operation, I needed evidence before confronting him. I positioned myself in the maintenance corridor behind Theater 6, where I could observe undetected. At exactly 1:45 a.m., I heard vehicles at the back entrance, multiple cars, engines running quietly to minimize noise. Footsteps echoed through the corridor, accompanied by voices I recognized. Mr. Kowalski was speaking in hushed, professional tones. Tonight's subject is particularly interesting. A local accountant who's been embezzling for 3 years. The guilt has been eating at him, creating psychological pressure that produces excellent results. How long have you been monitoring him? The second voice belonged to a woman with a slight accent. 6 months of careful observation. Phone taps, hidden cameras in his office and home, detailed psychological profiling. We know exactly which emotional triggers will produce the most authentic response. They were discussing someone like a scientific specimen, analyzing behavioral patterns with clinical detachment. But authentic response to what? At least 5 people were involved, speaking with casual efficiency of a professional team. The equipment is ready. Someone reported. Cameras positioned, sound levels optimized, lighting configured for maximum psychological impact. Excellent. Mr. Kowalski replied. Bring him in. They dragged someone through the corridor, a man who was conscious but barely coherent, probably sedated. His feet scraped against concrete as they carried him toward Theater 6, his voice weak and confused. Where am I? What's happening? I want to go home. You're going to be famous. Mr. Kowalski told him with genuine enthusiasm. Your story will be preserved forever, experienced by audiences who will truly understand your situation. Through a gap in the curtains behind the screen, I could see their setup. Professional film equipment surrounded a single chair positioned center stage. Multiple cameras captured different angles, while powerful lights created dramatic shadows. It was sophisticated documentary equipment. But this wasn't a legitimate documentary. They strapped the semi-conscious man into the chair and began setting up additional equipment. Devices I didn't recognize, machines that hummed with electrical energy and looked more medical than filming gear. The process works best when the subject experiences genuine terror. Mr. Kowalski explained to his team. Fear strips away psychological defenses, reveals authentic emotion that can't be faked through traditional acting. A team member activated a large screen behind the man's chair. Images appeared, photographs of his family, home, workplace. Personal details gathered through extensive surveillance. We know about the money you've stolen, Mr. Kowalski said, his voice amplified through the theater's sound system. We know about your gambling addiction, your wife's medical bills, the desperate choices you've made to keep your family afloat. The man's eyes widened as he began understanding his situation. Sedation wore off, replaced by dawning horror as he realized he was trapped. We're going to give you an opportunity to confess. Mr. Kowalski continued. To tell your story completely, honestly, without lies and justifications. And we're going to film every moment for posterity. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. ***. I understood then what the programs advertised. These weren't fictional films. They were documented confessions extracted through psychological torture. Mr. Kowalski and his team were creating a library of human suffering, capturing people at their most vulnerable moments. The man began struggling against restraints as the full horror became clear. Cameras rolled, capturing every expression of terror, every desperate escape attempt. But as I prepared to call 911, I heard something that froze my blood. Our night security guard should be arriving soon, Mr. Kowalski announced. He's been so helpful these past months, providing detailed information about police patrol schedules and building security protocols. They knew I was there. Had known all along. You can come out now, Mr. Kowalski called toward my hiding spot. There's no point in pretending anymore. Footsteps were already moving through the corridor toward my position. They had been watching me as carefully as their victims, learning my routines and predicting my behavior. The interesting thing about night shift workers, Mr. Kowalski said as they escorted me into Theater 6, is how isolated they become. Perfect subjects because no one really knows their schedules or expects regular contact. Your story will be particularly compelling, Mr. Kowalski told me as they guided me toward a second chair. A security guard who discovers a terrible secret but realizes too late that he's been part of the operation all along. As they secured me in place, I finally understood the full scope of what Mr. Kowalski had created. The theater was a laboratory for studying human psychology under extreme stress. Every victim provided data about fear responses, breaking points, and psychological coping mechanisms. The screens lit up around me, displaying images from my own life. My apartment, my family, my personal history laid out in exhaustive detail. They had been studying me for months. The confession we're looking for, Mr. Kowalski said, settling into a director's chair among the cameras, concerns your role in previous productions. The information you provided about building security, surveillance blind spots, optimal times for bringing subjects through the back entrance. Images flashed on screens around me. Security schedules I had mentioned in casual conversation. Comments about police patrol patterns. Innocent observations that had been carefully collected and used to facilitate their operations. Every night shift worker becomes complicit eventually, Mr. Kowalski said with something approaching sympathy. The isolation makes them eager to share information, to feel connected to something larger than their lonely routine. The cameras began rolling as I struggled to understand how my casual conversations had enabled their crimes. No, Mr. Kowalski said, his voice taking on the professional tone I'd heard him use with previous victims. Let's begin your confession. But as the first wave of whatever they were using hit me, I realized something that gave me final hope. In my pocket, still recording, was the digital recorder I'd brought to document evidence. Every word of this conversation, every detail of their process, was being captured. The last thing I remember clearly was Mr. Kowalski leaning forward in his director's chair, eyes bright with scientific curiosity. Tell us about the guilt, he said. Tell us how it feels to know that your loneliness made you the perfect accomplice. The recording cuts off there. If you're listening to this, you found my recorder in Theater 6 of the Paramount Cinema. Check behind the screen, in the maintenance corridor. Look for the names carved into the wall. They're all real people who disappeared. And if you work the night shift anywhere, remember, the friendly questions your supervisor asks aren't always as innocent as they seem. Some people collect information like trophies. And they're always looking for their next subject. I never wanted the graveyard shift at Mercy General Hospital. Nobody does. But when you're drowning in student loans and they offer you an extra $4 an hour for working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., you take it. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself a lot of things at 3 a.m. when the corridors stretch like throats, and the fluorescent lights hum their sick song. I'd been working nights for 3 months when I noticed the pattern. It started with the security logs. Part of my job as the night administrative coordinator was to review the previous shift's incident reports. Boring stuff, mostly, visitors staying past hours, equipment malfunctions, the occasional patient who got confused and wandered. But there was something else. Every Tuesday and Thursday, between 2:47 and 3:15 a.m., the security cameras in the East Wing would go dark. Not malfunction. Not static. Just dark. I mentioned it to Carlos, the security guard who'd been there longer than anyone. System maintenance. he said, not meeting my eyes. Don't worry about it. But I did worry. Because during those same windows, the patient mortality reports showed a spike. Not huge, just enough to notice if you were looking. And I was looking. The East Wing housed our long-term care patients. Coma patients. People who couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't tell anyone if something was wrong. The perfect victims, if you thought about it that way. Which I was starting to. I began staying late on Tuesdays, pretending to catch up on paperwork. The first time, nothing happened. The second time, I saw Dr. Melissa Chen enter the East Wing at 2:45 a.m. This wasn't unusual. Doctors made rounds at all hours. What was unusual was that she wasn't scheduled. I checked. The cameras went dark at 2:47, just like always. When they came back online at 3:15, Dr. Chen was gone. The next morning, room 314's patient, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 67, persistent vegetative state following a stroke, was dead. Natural causes, the report said. Expected given her condition. I started digging. Over the past year, 17 patients had died during those dark windows. All in the East Wing. All during Dr. Chen's visits. All ruled natural causes. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I should have gone to the police. Should have reported it to the hospital administration. But I needed proof. Real proof. So I did something stupid. I bought a small camera online, one of those spy cameras that looks like a button. The next Tuesday, I planted it in room 314, now occupied by Mr. James Hoffman, 54, traumatic brain injury from a motorcycle accident. At 2:44 a.m., I was at my desk, watching the hospital's security monitors. Right on schedule, Dr. Chen appeared in the East Wing corridor. She moved with purpose, her white coat pristine even at this ungodly hour. At 2:47, the screens went black. But my hidden camera kept recording. I waited until my shift ended to retrieve it. My hands shook as I downloaded the footage in my car. What I saw made me pull over and vomit in a gas station parking lot. Dr. Chen had entered room 314 carrying a small medical bag. She checked the hallway, then closed the door. The footage was grainy, but I could see her remove a syringe from her bag. She didn't inject it into the foreport, though. She injected it directly into Mr. Hoffman's neck, into the carotid artery. Then she stood there, watching. Waiting. It took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of her standing perfectly still, watching him die. Then she checked his pulse, noted something on a clipboard, and left. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she looked directly at my hidden camera and smiled. I drove home in a haze. She knew. Somehow she knew. I called in sick the next night, and the night after that. I couldn't go back. Couldn't face those corridors knowing what happened in them. Knowing she was there. On Friday, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Sarah. Dr. Chen's voice was calm, professional. I think we should talk. I'm going to the police, I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. No, you're not. She sounded almost amused. Check your email. I did. There was a video file. Security footage of me planting the camera in room 314. Another of me retrieving it. And then screenshots, my search history from the hospital computer. All my research into the deaths. Into her. Tampering with patient rooms, violating HIPAA by accessing records without authorization, installing recording devices in a medical facility. These are serious crimes, Sarah. Federal crimes, some of them. You're killing people, I whispered. Am I? She laughed softly. Those patients were vegetables, Sarah. Brain dead. Their families were drowning in medical debt, watching their loved ones rot away day by day. I gave them peace. I gave them mercy. That's not your choice to make. Isn't it? Their families seem to think so. Why do you think the cameras go dark? Why do you think no one's ever reported anything? This isn't some rogue operation, Sarah. This is a service. A necessary service that this hospital provides to families who can't afford to watch their loved ones suffer indefinitely. My blood ran cold. The hospital knows. The hospital facilitates. We have a waiting list. Forms to fill out. Insurance considerations. It's all very organized. Very humane. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Your next shift is Tuesday. Dr. Chin continued. I expect to see you there. We'll discuss your new responsibilities. After all, someone needs to handle the paperwork. Make sure the right patients are selected. The previous coordinator had a crisis of conscience, much like you. But I think you're smarter than that, aren't you, Sarah? The previous. I thought of Janet, who'd trained me. Who'd quit suddenly for personal reasons 3 months ago. Who'd looked haunted in her final weeks. Tuesday, Sarah. Don't make me come find you. The line went dead. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. I showed up Tuesday. Not because I was brave. Because I was terrified. Terrified of what they'd do if I ran. Terrified of the federal charges. Terrified of ending up like those patients in the East Wing. Dr. Chin was waiting in my office. On my desk was a folder. Your new caseload, she said. 5 families have submitted applications this month. You'll review their financial situations, their loved ones' medical status, and make recommendations. I handle the medical side. You handle the administrative. I opened the folder. Forms. Signatures. Desperate pleas from families who couldn't afford another month of care. Another year of watching someone they loved exist without living. I won't do this, I said. Yes, you will. She leaned back in my chair. My chair. Because if you don't, someone else will. And those patients will still die. But you? You'll be in federal prison. Or worse. Worse? She smiled that same smile from the video. Accidents happen, Sarah. Especially on the night shift. Tired workers make mistakes. Fall downstairs. Take the wrong medication. End up in the East Wing themselves. I looked at the folder again. At the top was a name I recognized. Mrs. Patricia Weaver. I'd seen her daughter in the lobby last week, crying, begging the billing department for more time. How do you live with yourself? I asked. I sleep very well, actually. Better than those families who watch their loved ones waste away for years because they're too selfish or too afraid to let go. We're not murderers, Sarah. We're facilitators of an inevitable outcome. We just make it efficient. I signed the forms. All of them. What else could I do? That was 6 months ago. I still work the night shift. Still review the files. Still watch the cameras go dark every Tuesday and Thursday. I've gotten good at the paperwork. At selecting the right candidates. At pretending I don't know what happens in those dark windows. Last week, my mother had a stroke. She's in the East Wing now. Persistent vegetative state, the doctors say. Minimal chance of recovery. The bills are already piling up. Dr. Chen left a form on my desk yesterday. Just in case, she said. Just in case I need it. I keep thinking about those families. About their relief when the bills finally stop coming. About the way they thank Dr. Chen at the funerals, tears in their eyes, grateful for her compassionate care. In their loved one's final moments. I keep thinking about my mother. About the mortgage I took out to pay for her care. About how peaceful she looks, lying there. How empty. The form sits in my desk drawer. Waiting. Sometimes, during my shift, I walk past her room. Room 314. The same room where I hid that camera. Where Mr. Hoffman died. Where so many have died. Will die. The cameras will go dark again tonight. Dr. Chin will make her rounds. And I'll be at my desk, doing paperwork, pretending I don't know what happens in the darkness. Because that's what the night shift is really about. Not just staying awake when the world sleeps. It's about the things we do in the darkness. The choices we make when no one's watching. The lies we tell ourselves at 3 a.m. when the corridors stretch like throats, and the only sound is the hum of machines keeping the dead alive. I never wanted the graveyard shift. But sometimes I think the graveyard shift chooses you. And once it does, you never really leave. You just learn to live in the dark. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.